Good morning, church. If we haven't met before, my name is Shelby and I am one of the pastors here at Como Baptist. It is wonderful to be here with you this morning. I would like to share with you a piece of artwork that my 6-year-old, Micah, has recently done for us. We'll have that one up on the screen. I want to ask you a question. What do you think this is a painting of? What do you see? Well, if anyone answered an elephant, you would be correct. I have it confirmed from the artist himself. Micah has told me that this is, in fact, an elephant. When Micah told us this, Ben and I could absolutely see it. You know, big orange body, and I see 2 big green ears, and then I see almost like a brown trunk on one side and a brown tail on the other. Wasn't quite sure what the stripes were in the middle, and I don't know why there was these random blue dots. But either way, it's a little bit of a mess, but I could see it. I could see that this was an elephant. So we proudly hung it up in our dining room for all to see. After a couple of months of this painting being hung up, Micah and I were sitting at the dining room table eating lunch when we were looking at it and talking about the elephant. And Micah was talking about it being in a zoo. I just thought we were using our imagination, so I ran with it. I was like, oh, okay, cool, a zoo. Maybe it shares an enclosure with one of the giraffes. Micah scrunched up his face and he said, no, Mum, a giraffe couldn't fit in that enclosure. It wouldn't fit behind those bars. Bars? What? It turned out that big orange body was not a body at all, but rather those orange lines were the zoo enclosure. And the green and the brown are not ears, not trunk, not tail, but actually they were the green and the brown from the trees, the branches and the leaves surrounding the zoo enclosure. Here is the elephant. Of course. How did I not see it? The more closely I look at it now, through the lens of the creator, the designer, Micah, the more I see it for what it truly is, a masterpiece. If I were to ask you, are we a mess or are we a masterpiece? I wonder how you would answer. If we were to take a snapshot of our world, our lives, our inner being, and if we hung it up on the wall for all to see, if we stood back and looked, would we see ourselves as a disjointed mesh of lines, misshaped shapes, random spots? Or would we stand back and gaze in wonder and affirm ourselves as a masterpiece? I suppose it could depend on what parts of ourselves that we hung up and looked at, right? We could hang up the events broadcasted in the daily news, mess, or masterpiece. What if we brought it a little bit closer to home? What if we hung up our church for all of the surrounding community to see? What then? Are we, Como Baptist, a mess or a masterpiece? What would the community around us say? It takes courage to ask questions like that, doesn't it? How about if we hung up a mirror and displayed ourselves for the world to see? How much more courage does that take? A mess or a masterpiece? In our passage today, 2 Corinthians 12, 7-10, Paul is doing just this. He's holding up a mirror, giving himself, giving God, giving the world a very honest look at himself. Let's read verses 7-8. Therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me, but he said to me, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. We could speculate on what Paul's thorn was. Whatever that thorn may be, we aren't told, but we are given very strong imagery. Paul is telling us, he is publicly putting it out there for all to read. He is describing having a weakness, and he describes that weakness so strongly as being like a messenger of Satan, sticking into him like a thorn in his flesh. In verse 8, we see Paul pleading with God 3 times, take it away. Take this away. Desperation seeping out. This is not a very pretty picture, is it? So Paul, a mess or a masterpiece? From verses 7 and 8 alone, I would say a mess. Here is Paul pleading to God. And what does God do? How does God respond? To find out, we can look at verse 9. It says, "But he said to me, my grace is all you need. My power is strongest when you are weak." For many years, when I approached this scripture, I almost had an image or a picture of someone doing weight training in a gym. Now, I don't know if you know a lot about weight training. It's certainly not something that I'm an expert in. But from what I do know, when weight training, many might use a second person in the gym, almost like a gym spotter. What is a spotter? Well, I'm so glad you asked. A spotter is someone who can assist your lift if needed. They stand close by, ready to take some of the weight in case you can't finish that rep, you can't finish that lift. But the unwritten agreement is that spotters don't help unless you are failing. I wonder if you have ever gone through life with God like this. Going through life, pushing ourselves as hard as we can, relying on our own strength, determined to achieve more, be more. Or perhaps it's not even that. So often it's not even about putting in the effort to do great things or be more or do more. Sometimes it's us putting in the effort, just trying to be enough, just trying to feel worthy. And then we max out our own capacity, our own capability, and we come up against our own limitations. We use God as our own personal spotter, relying on him to swoop in and carry us when we have nothing left to give. I'm not sure the image of God being our spotter, I'm not sure it's all bad. I don't want to fully condemn this image of this way of relating to God. I'm just not sure this imagery is full enough. I think if we were to leave it there, we would be missing out on something really rich that God has for us. A really rich invitation he has for our lives. You see, the term weak there in verse 9, "But he said to me, my grace is all you need. My power is strongest when you are weak." When we trace that back to the original text, when it's referring to weakness, it's not just referring to a quantity of strength or a quantity of power. If we start focusing on strength and power alone, the temptation for us is to slip into pushing ourselves, find more self-discipline, do more, try harder, be more, train more, try to make it grow in our own strength so that we can come back bigger and better next time. That's not what we're seeing here in the passage. You see, the original text, when it's using the term weakness, it's referring to infirmities, When we start talking about an infirmity, we are no longer talking about a muscle that needs developing or strengthening or training. We're actually talking about an injury, a brokenness, something that needs restoring. You see, Paul was not this tough guy in the gym lifting weights, using God as a spotter to swoop in and prevent injury if he comes to the end of himself. Paul was already injured. Paul was already on the floor. He was already broken, and he was already pleading. He had already failed. He had already been asking for restoration. You see, when we come to this passage, I would invite us to consider less about the level of power and strength that we may or may not possess. I would invite us to consider Paul's weakness and our own weakness, more of an inability to function in the way we were truly designed to function, due to an infirmity, due to a brokenness, much like this bowl, shattered on the ground. Was it designed to be broken? No. Was it designed to be a mess? No. But it is. So were we designed to be broken? No. Well, we were designed to be whole, living in the Garden of Eden with God. But here we are. And now that we are here, we don't need to work harder, try more, be more. We, like Paul, need restoration. Thankfully, we know the story doesn't end here, does it? God doesn't leave Paul or us broken and a mess on the floor. Let's keep reading together. But he said to me, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weakness, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong." Can you see that shift that Paul makes here? He is no longer painting us an image of himself being desperate or broken. His description of himself turns from a mess into a masterpiece. I am glad for my weakness. Christ's power rests on me. I delight in my weakness, my pain, my suffering, in the mess, in the brokenness. For when I am weak, then I am strong. How did this shift occur? Did he hit the gym? Did he increase his own strength? Did he restore himself? No, we see God stepping in. My grace is sufficient for you. In Christ's power, this is the work that was done on the cross. Live in action. This isn't God as a spotter. This is Christ as restorer. For many of us in the room, we may have accepted Christ as our restorer long ago. And if you haven't yet, and you would like to, I would really love to have that conversation with you and explore that further. But for many of us this morning, the invitation from God isn't just to accept Christ as restorer. The invitation for many of us is to be glad. It is to boast. I can be glad because it is when I am a mess that God creates a masterpiece. Next slide. I wonder if you have ever heard of the Japanese art, kintsugi. Kintsugi, which means golden joinery, is a Japanese method of mending broken ceramics with gold. The story goes, in the 15th century, a military leader broke his favourite precious tea bowls. So he sent them away to be restored. He wasn't willing to accept that they were broken. When they returned, he was so disappointed to find that, yes, they had been repaired, but the splits and the fragmentation, it was so obvious that the joinery was so visible that they looked like a mess. They didn't look valuable anymore. Again, not willing to give up on his precious tea bowls, he set out to find a solution. And he decided, rather than trying to conceal the obvious joins, he would instead find a way to emphasize them and turn these imperfections into something beautiful, something aesthetically pleasing. So he did exactly that. And from there, kintsugi was born. Since then, kintsugi has become such an appreciated form of art that people now purposely break bowls so that they can restore them, because a kintsugi, a piece of art, is so much more valuable than just an ordinary old bowl. This is the imagery that Paul is leading us to. God's grace through Christ on the cross is gold, restoring the parts of us that are weak, that are fragmented, our infirmities, weaving our mess together to form a masterpiece. What could our lives look like if we were fully to step in to this way of living, this way of thinking, this way of viewing ourselves and the world? I want to be very careful here. When we talk about our brokenness, when we start talking about our weakness, the messiness of life, that is going to resonate with each of us in a whole bunch of different ways. For some of us, we're going to think about the small daily things, the things that are probably fixable. But for others, we might start thinking about things that are a bit deeper, a bit larger, the harder parts of our stories. No matter what it stirs up for you, big or small, I want to be very clear. Paul is not telling us that we were designed to be broken. Paul is not telling us that God broke us. And Paul is not saying that we should be grateful or joyful or glad when others inflict pain or brokenness or mess upon us. Rather, Paul provides hope. A hope that restoration is possible through Christ. There is no mess too big for God to come and transform into a beautiful masterpiece. It doesn't matter who you are, where you've been, what you've done, or what's been done to you. We are never too far gone for God. This is the message of the cross. This is the gold that we can be glad about. It is for that we can boast. We as a church have been joining God as we embark on some really wonderful things. We have for generations and we continue to now. We have embarked on Chapel Hill, believing that God has called us as a church to be a light on a hill, out, present within our community. And we are now embarking on our community mural project. Again, out, present in our community. We are already doing things like this regularly. Toddler jam, parenting seminars, our freezer ministry meal, Canning Bridge Early Learning Centre. I know many of you that do this in your own lives, just on a daily basis in the relationships that you have. As we do these things, as we say yes to Jesus and step out into his way of life, what is the masterpiece that we are shining out? What is the image that we are hanging up and displaying out there for all to see? What is it that we are boasting about? As individuals, we could present a version of ourselves to the world that we think the world wants to see. It's usually quite easy, isn't it? To put on a public version of ourselves, hide the mess, present our own attempt at a masterpiece. As a church, we could do the same. We could go out into our community in our own efforts. Look, world, at this magnificent building development that we're building. Look, world, look at this cool community mural that we're painting. Take notice of us. Come to our events. Come to church on Sundays. We are worth your time. We could do that. Or could we, like Paul, both as individuals and as a congregation, find the courage to hold the mirror up and be honest with God, honest with ourselves about our own limitations? Are we worthy? Are we capable? Are we good enough? Do I actually have something worth saying, worth someone's time to stop and listen to? The answer is yes, of course, yes. But the value that we bring to the world is not what we do or how well we do it. The value is the gold that is weaving us together. That is what brings the value. If we fast forward 10, 20 years from now, Chapel Hill will be well established. It'll just be a normal landmark here in the Como area. The value we bring as a church will not be, look at our amazing buildings. We made them. The value that we will be able to bring will be the stories we get to tell of how God wove together a bunch of ordinary, fragmented people and faithfully pulled together something of worth, restoring us, restoring our community in the process. Building projects, there will always be obstacles. There will always be mess. But where is the gold? Community murals, early learning centres, toddler jam, missions clusters, hospitality clusters, worship clusters. Wherever there is humans, there will always be mess. There will always be weakness. There will always be infirmities. But where is the gold? We are going to move into a time of communion now, and I would like to invite the stewards up. Matthew 26 to 30 says, "While we were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, 'Take and eat. This is my body.' Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, 'Drink from it. All of you, this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many of the forgiveness of sins. Communion this morning is our invitation to hold up the mirror. But when we do, we don't need to fall down in the weight of shame, heavy and burdened from any mess that we might see. We are invited to see ourselves through the lens of the Creator, the Designer, the Restorer. Much like Micah's elephant, Ben and I were looking through the wrong lens. But Micah, the designer, could appreciate it for what it really was. Let's seek to view ourselves through the lens of the one who designed us. Let's seek to look for the strands of the gold woven through. Because that is the restoration through the cross that communion invites us to remember. And that is what we are invited to come and remember this morning. For you, it might be a moment this morning where you actually come and bring your mess and your fragmentations and come and bring it before the cross. So please come forward, help yourself to bread and a cup, partake in the bread as you sit and reflect with Christ. Hold on to the cup and we will drink together at the end.